Hello and welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Nicole and today I'm going to be talking about books that I hauled before 2022. In theory, there's a question mark there, which there is, it's because I basically started logging my books on the story graph somewhere between 2022 and 2023. And then I went back and did my best to add the books that I think I hauled and read during 2021 and earlier, but it's not including everything. Anyway, I do have a short list of books that are logged in the story graph, have ratings and all the things. And so we're going to talk about those real quickly because I realized recently that I am just on the cusp of a little achievement, if you will. Very small achievement will be unlocked. Anyway, let's discuss what 2022, well, before 2022, looks like on the story graph for me. So maybe if Storygraph is agreeable with this and I can get it to do it, I will scroll on the screen all the books that are in the Storygraph that it says I have read before 2022. I'm pretty sure I can filter it in that manner. What I can tell you about those books is that I have read about 46 books and things that are worth pointing out. I guess I can talk about what my top 5 books were from that year, or at least that I recall. And some of these were books that I read all the way back in 2021. Some of them are books that I listed as having acquired then that I've only just finally gotten to. So I have two of each basically. So books that I have read a while ago and really enjoyed, gave 5 stars, include The Memory Police and Piranesi. And these are books that I really enjoyed. I definitely see myself rereading. I would recommend frequently and have. And they're also books that I still think of today. And that whenever I hear anybody mention them, I'm still like, oh yeah, that was a really good book. And so those are 2 that I'm like, yep, I read them pretty close to around the time when I hauled them. And I have The Memory Police, but it's high up on one of those shelves. So I wasn't pulling it down. But I realized when looking at this that I don't actually own a copy of Piranesi. I believe that was a book that I borrowed from the library. So I now need to go out and get my own copy of that. I also have 2 books from this list that I do own and that I hauled then in 2021 or earlier, but that I only just read in the past year. One of them is The Overground Railroad. I just read that in the last couple of months. I've also read Project Hail Mary. This is another book that I've owned since at least 2021, but I only just finally read it 4 years later. I really enjoyed both of these books. The Overground Railroad has a really good audiobook to listen to and experience. And Project Hail Mary is now coming out as a movie because it's been so long since book was published that I've then owned it and I only just finally read it. But I guess it's kind of working out because I've recently read it and now I get to see the movie. So there's that. I did look to see what my lowest rated book was from that year or those sets of years that I hauled. These are basically all TBR vets. Let's just describe them as that from this point on. But I did look up to see what my lowest rated TBR vet was, and it was Assembly by Natasha Brown. I remember that I chose this as a family book club pick, and none of us liked it, which surprised me because I believe it's won the Booker Prize or at least was nominated for it, and people raved about this book. I found it pretty close to incoherent, and I remember I read it on my e-reader, which now that I'm more familiar with literary fiction, I'm realizing for me was probably a mistake because for me, I find that certain types of literary fiction have a lot to do with how they're printed on the page, and I don't think translates well to e-readers, at least not in my experience. So I don't know that I would have had a better experience if I had have read that book as a physical book. I did actually go and look at a physical copy of it in a bookstore and didn't feel like that was going to change the experience. But anyway, I gave that book a 1. It was a struggle to get through. My whole family struggled getting through it, and we were so glad when it was over. But we read the whole thing. We finished it. We finished it, and it took all 4 or 5 of us together to figure out what happened in that book, and we still didn't like it. Which is interesting to reflect back on right now because Natasha Brown just came out with another book this year, Universality, and interestingly enough, people don't like that one as much. Um, I don't know. I don't know what to make of that. I feel like the first book was overhyped, so I can't help but wonder if the second book, now that it's not being overhyped, is more representative of how I felt about the first book to begin with. We'll never know. I know a lot of people like the first book. I just happen not to be one of them. Okay, so what are some other things that I noticed when looking back at this year? One, I did recall that this was a year where my family and I were at the height of our family book club. There were a handful of family members that were in it with me. It was me, my mother, my aunt, my grandmother, and one of my cousins, and occasionally one of my other cousins would join us. And we spent about almost 2 years reading books together, and we're all pretty voracious readers, so we got through a lot, and that was a really fun time. It was also a very tricky reading time because I think one of the things that we never really discussed, but I realized is we all have fairly different reading taste, but it was still fun to see what other people wanted to read, how we felt about it, and that kind of thing. This was also the year, or the years, where I both hauled, borrowed, and read a lot of books off the Booker Prize list. I think the year before I had really found out a lot about the Booker Prize and really wanted to try reading more off of it. So I think I read a pretty decent chunk of books off of the Booker Prize 2021 long list, or it might have been the 2022 long list. If I can figure out which one it is, I'll put it on the screen. I had a very mixed experience with it. I liked some of the books, I really didn't like some of the other books, and I think this was the experience that made me realize that there was something about the Booker Prize that just didn't totally line up with my own reading taste. I realize now more than anything that a lot of the winners and books chosen for the Booker Prize tend to just be a little too literary for my personal taste, tend to be too focused on like writing style and the format of how a story is told versus like the plot and the narrative and that kind of thing. A lot is sort of played and experimented around with, and that can be really hit or miss for me in my personal reading experience. The other thing that I noticed that I thought was really funny was that my most read author this year was Kazuo Ishiguro. And it kind of makes sense. This was definitely a time period where if I liked an author and found out a lot about the author or heard a lot about the author, that I wanted to keep trying more of their books. And so I sort of binged my way through over the course of that year a lot of Kazuo Ishiguro's books. So I think I read pretty much all of them, including Clara in the Sun. I don't know if that was that year, but at least books that I acquired during those years, I have read Kazuo Ishiguro the most by far. Yeah, I think that was in 2021 itself. I read the most books by Kazuo Ishiguro. So that was just interesting to see and not what I expected. But looking at that stat, I do recall that actually being the case, that I read a lot of his books sort of back to back to back. And yeah, I realized maybe last month that if I go back and look at the books that I at least say I've acquired as of 2021 and have listed on the story graph, that I only have 3 books from that list of about 46 that I haven't read yet. And so I thought, ooh, that would be a nice achievement to be able to say that I've read all of those books. So let me share with you what the rest of the books are. The 3 I have left include Sword of Kaigen, Assassin's Apprentice, and With God in Russia. I should have pulled the books off, but I didn't. I'll be putting everything up on the screen anyway. So let me start by talking about the Sword of Kaigen. This whole video idea came up because in my last TBR game, I got to pick a book off of the earlier than 2022 list, and like I said, I only had 3 books left, and I ended up getting Sword of Kaigen on that TBR. So I will be reading Sword of Kaigen very soon if I haven't already read it by the time you guys see this video. Assassin's Apprentice. This was definitely acquired during a phase where I was reading a lot more fantasy than anything else. Thus, Assassin's Apprentice and Sword of Kaigen were on this list. I have since then not been reading fantasy quite as frequently. I realize it's not necessarily one of my favorite genres and that it can feel very repetitive to me after a while. And because of that, some of the books that I still kind of want to try, but not anytime soon, have been lingering on my shelves for quite a while. Sword of Kaigen, I've heard really good things. I'm hoping I really enjoy it. And I don't know, for some reason, it was just one of those books that I just couldn't let go of without trying. And I do feel like Assassin's Apprentice kind of falls into the same category where I hear so many good things about it that I'm like, well, I do own it. I should at least give it a chance before I unhaul it or whatever. But at the same time, I hear a lot of people be like, it's really slow paced, it's high fantasy, it's a really intricate plot, it's a very long series, it's a lot of things that I don't enjoy in fantasy. For my fantasy, I tend to like very heavily plot driven novels. I prefer them to be medium to fast paced. I like them to be like on the shorter side, maybe 400 pages max, and I like standalones. So, because I'm rarely in a fantasy novel going to continue a series. So, this is making me think that I may stand a better chance with Sword of Kaigen, even though it still doesn't hit all of those boxes. But it makes me really concerned that I'm not going to like Assassin's Apprentice, even if it's well written. So, we'll see what I think of Robin Hobb when I get to it. And then the last one with God in Russia, this has been lingering on my shelf for a while. There was a point in time where I was reading about different Catholic experiences of imprisonment in Russia. Don't ask how I got on that topic. Somehow I did. And there were three different books that I really wanted to read. I acquired them all in this same year. I read two of them and really thought they were well done. With God in Russia is the third one that I have that I want to read. And it's actually sort of the same as one of the other stories. So, one of the other books that I read was also a nonfiction, like With God in Russia, is written by the same person as With God in Russia. But the difference between the two books is that one of them is focused just a lot more on the person's like prison experience and just sort of the political situation that was going on. And the other book is focused more on the person's spiritual experience and how that was going throughout all of the time. And I no longer remember which one is which and which one With God in Russia is, but that's the one that I have left. But either way, I just find that like I get it. I'm not so into that topic anymore, or like I feel like I read enough on it that I got out of it what I wanted and don't necessarily need to read this book, especially because it's just the same story from a different perspective, even though I've heard that there's certain elements that are in one book that aren't in the other, et cetera, et cetera. So again, we'll see how that goes. So yeah, those are the three that I have left. I do really want to get through all three of them by the end of the year, or at least have tried them and decided whether I want to unhaul them or whatever. And sorry, the light is getting really crazy here. It started really bright and now the sun must be behind a cloud. So that's what happens when you go with natural lighting. I do want to get to all three books by the end of the year. We'll see if that happens, but keep an eye out for them because I am going to just try and sneak them in here and there. I'm going to try and get them on a TBR game. I did already get Sword of Kaigen on there, but if I can't get the other two on my TBR game, I'm still going to try them and just fit them in whenever it makes sense to read them. So that's it for now. What is my plan after I finish these three books? It's to start working on books that I acquired in 2022. Now, again, I should warn you when it comes to that video that there are a lot of books. And I don't think it's because I acquired them all in 2022. I think what it is that 2022 is the year where I finally added all of the books that I owned to the story graph. At least that's what I'm hoping happened, but that's a whole nother conversation and a whole nother video, and that won't happen until I finish these three books. Hopefully that won't take too long, but we'll find out together. So that's it for today. Let me know, what are some of the oldest books on your bookshelf? Or like how far back does your TBR stack go? Like Are your TBR vets, 4 years old, 5 years old, 20 years old? Let me know what the oldest acquired book is on your shelf and how long ago you got it, and I will talk to you next time. Bye.